Good afternoon, LinkedIn land, and welcome to another edition of Philanthropy Friday. Somebody was asking me, how many of these LinkedIn Live Philanthropy Fridays have we done? This is like our third year, so we've got close to 40 episodes where we have recognized people who are real leaders in the industry, charities, strategies, opportunities for advisors, for generous donors, and just for wisdom seekers on how to make a difference, how to be good and do well at the same time. I'm Mark Halpern. I'm the CEO of WealthInsurance.com. Been in professional practice for almost 35 years, working with successful business owners, entrepreneurs, and affluent families in three areas: estate planning, tax mitigation using tax exempt life insurance strategies, and philanthropy, which is really the area that I love the most because we can make such a difference by helping people create enduring legacies, often just by converting tax into charity. And that's really what we like to help people understand. Today, we're going to be talking to two of my favorite people, Luke Carter, who's the president and CEO of CAP Advisors, and also the son of a dear friend of mine, Graham Carter, who passed away this past year. It's been over a year, I guess, now, and was one of the top insurance estate planning advisors in Canada. Was always up there in the number one or number two spot. But besides that, just an amazing human being, a great guy, good friend, mentor, and funny as can be. We're also going to have Aneil Gokhale, who's the director of philanthropy for the Toronto Foundation, also a dear friend who's been kind of like the poster boy for donor advised funds in Canada, or certainly in Toronto, helping people understand this very hidden treasure that all of us should know about. And we should be talking to people and actually having donor advised funds ourselves. So we get a real opportunity today to create the intersection of tax, insurance, philanthropy, annuities, all that, all of the foundations all together to really help clients move their shells around to do well, and give back to the community. So before we get started, just as an introduction, I'm going to. So here you can see we're going to be talking about Graham Carter and memorial legacies. Really, that's the focus today because the Carter family did something very spectacular, and we're using this podcast today as an opportunity to tell everybody what they did so that you can do the same for your family, your clients, your business, and for your communities. And it's really not a lot of heavy lifting, as we'll see. So couple of just pieces of housekeeping before we get started. Our mission at Wealth Insurance is threefold. We would like to inspire and educate every professional advisor in Canada and charity to be incorporating strategic philanthropy into their clients and donors' estate planning. It really is something that does not get talked a lot about, and it's an exciting area, and that's what Philanthropy Friday is about. Also, we specialize in insurance, and people know what insurance is, but they don't really understand what it does. So we're trying to change that as well. And the lastly is we're trying to create a national community of 100 professional advisors and charities that if each of us are creating $10 million a year times 100, that's $1 billion a year, and that's not like sort of pie in the sky. It's kind of crowdfunding, and we've already got a couple of dozen already attached to this. So if it's something that's of interest, we'd love to share some great wisdom with you to make it easier for you to get your clients to give. I'd say that the high level of what we're talking about is people don't realize how much tax there is. And here's just in Ontario. So you can have somebody who's got lots of wealth on paper, but as they do the planning, as Luke does for his clients as well over at Cap Advisors, suddenly that $10 million that they're worth is only worth $6.5 million. And our clients need to know that. They need to get a check mark, but they need to know what the tax bill is now and at life expectancy so that they can do some planning to include strategies to preserve family wealth or to include charity or to do both. And we always talk about how all of us have three possible beneficiaries to our estates. You've got family, you've got the government, you've got charity, and each of us can pick two. The question is, which two would you pick? Most people would take family and charity. And with proper planning, you could be remembered for leaving a lot of money to charity, as we'll hear from Luke and Aneil, as opposed to writing a big check to the government. Now, we need money for the government. Don't get me wrong, but there's no law that says that you have to leave a tip. And the government has introduced about 25 pieces of legislation since 95 to make it more favorable for Canadians to give. And last thing, what people need to know, while charitable donations are great every year, that you can use them to mitigate up to 75% of your net taxable income. What most people don't realize is that on death, charitable donations can be used to mitigate 100% of estate taxes. That's correct, 100%, including going back the year prior. That means for every $2 you give to charity, you turn a dollar of tax into charity. And people need to know that. And also, they need to know life insurance can be owned by a charity or by a private foundation or donor advised fund, which we're going to hear about from today from Luke and Aneil. And there's no alternative minimum tax on death. So that's a good news. So, and if you have anybody, including yourself, stop donating with cash, checks, and credit cards. They are the most cost and tax ineffective way to give. There's probably about 30 ways that people could be giving more and better. And that's really what we want to talk about today. So, without any further ado, what I'd like to do is I would like to welcome our guests for today, Luke Carter and also Aneil Gokhale. Guys, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Yeah, we're looking forward to this chat.
I'm so happy. Yeah. Well, look at this is kind of like it was a little thought, Luke, a while ago. And for Aneil, it's certainly not a thought. It's something you've been plowing away at for years. But Luke, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background, about who you are, and we can talk a little bit about your father and how did this whole topic come about, and we can go from there.
Yeah, well, my name is Luke Carter. I'm president and CEO of Cap Advisors, Inc., and we are a second-generation insurance and estate planning firm. And I kind of got, in this business by accident. I, always knew what my father did, always spoke about insurance, but didn't really understand the high level of it. And Graham actually got into the insurance business 30 years ago by complete accident as well. He was reviewing his family's estate planning and realized how complicated it is and how hard it is, and decided that there was a real need for this planning. And Mark, I got to give you full credit for, really recommending the idea of a memorial fund for Graham. We stopped by your office just to talk about life, talk about business, talk about how we're going to take over our practice from our father, who unfortunately passed away last April from a sudden heart attack. And you brought, a great idea of creating a memorial fund to honor his legacy. And then that's how you introduced me to Aneil and the Toronto Community Foundation. And it was really easy to set up the fund. I think it was just deciding on what was the best way to structure the fund, what was the best way to move assets in the fund. And also with my family, we wanted to really have a strong sense of idea of what we wanted to back, what foundations. And given what happened with Graham, and we've had some family history of cardiac related health issues, that was I'd say the sector and industry really wanted to focus on.
Well, besides the serendipity, I don't call that, I call it more like divine providence of us getting together. There was more divine providence, Luke, in the fact that, a lot of businesses aren't as fortunate to have a succession plan. Your dad built up a business for many years. He was one of the top advisors in all of Canada, certainly in the top 1 or 2 or 3. And suddenly to have a heart attack, a healthy guy, and have, 4 boys, right? 4 sons, and that he actually had done some planning prior to his death, which had nothing to do with having any health challenges. It was just, can you just tell us quickly about that?
Yeah, I think I always like the idea of, having a family-run business, being your own boss. And Graham, I think, really took pride in growing up a business 30 years ago from scratch. And I think his plan was always have the sons come work with him, but he didn't push it too hard, let us do our own thing, and kind of naturally come into the business. And my younger brother, Dallas, he came to work for the business right out of Western University. I went to school in the States and was a financial advisor and worked for 2 big insurance companies down there. And in 2022, we moved back. And I think what really helped with our succession plan was letting our clients know that, we were planning to take over eventually. Graham had no plan on stopping anytime soon, maybe playing a little bit more golf, slowing down. But we wanted to make it as natural and seamless as possible for our clients to ensure there was really no major changes, that they don't see any change in service. And, fortunately, we let our clients know a few years ago that we were planning on taking it over. And then when Graham passed, unfortunately, it just made the transition a little bit easier than if we had not been in the business.
Well, it's fantastic. I mean, they say the the remedy comes before or the cure comes before the malady happens, and that's kind of what happened. So I appreciate that. I'd like to ask Aneil. First of all, Aneil, I don't know how much of an introduction you need. You should know everybody who follows me on Philanthropy Friday are all professional advisors, or they're people in the charity space, or they're philanthropists, or just clients or whatever wanting to know stuff. Neil, you are a real cheerleader for the charitable space, and congrats to you on that. Maybe you could just introduce yourself and tell people who you are and what you do.
For sure. And yeah, there's so many ways I can do this, but I think first and foremost, I really just want to say a big thank you to you, Mark, for primarily for the introduction to Luke and his family, because I think us being able to support what they have created is just it's what we do, and it's what we love to do, and it's the conversations we like to be a part of. So I'm grateful for that. But even more so, I think just for all the kinship and friendship we've developed over the years, and all the work we've done together in support of many clients. But even more than that, in support of the sector and in support of educating and providing knowledge. My day job. So I'm the director of philanthropy of Toronto Foundation. Toronto Foundation is one of Canada's 200 plus community foundations. Community foundations exist really all around the world. Started in Cleveland in 1914, and the first one in Canada was in Winnipeg in 1921. And so, as I said, there's 200 plus, and what we all do generally is we work with individuals and families in our local communities and help them with concepts like strategic philanthropy, and help them think about ways that they can structure their giving in sort of systems that will make things easier for them and ultimately help them with impact. Sometimes families will often think about setting up a private foundation. Sometimes they'll give directly to organizations. Those are certainly options that they can consider. And I think more and more folks are looking at donor advised funds as an option to consider among that sort of all of those different options that you might look at. There's pros and cons and sort of different considerations to take in. The primary offering of a community foundation is a donor advised fund. In my role, what I find myself doing a lot, especially with the families that I meet, is I find myself being more of almost like a philanthropic advisor. So what I'm here to do is to hear what that client, what that family is looking to achieve, and then to walk them through the different options available to them, of which one for sure is a donor advised fund, but maybe it's not always the right fit. And I think, your comment about me being a cheerleader for the philanthropy space, the charity space, I think that's what I want to come out loud and clear through all of my interactions. Ultimately, what I want is for more money to be going into the charitable sector where it's needed the most. And so I know that donor advised funds, particularly at community foundations, can really be an excellent avenue for that. But I'm not naive. I know that sometimes that's not the right pathway. And so I also want to be able to send people in the right directions when they want to do things that maybe are outside of what we can offer. And so there's other things we'll get into as this conversation unfolds. The last thing I'll say, I think, is just around the professional advisors. You mentioned that, and a lot of this audience that we're speaking with today is in that group. At the Toronto Foundation and at many of my community foundation peers, a lot of work is being done in terms of educating and providing reference materials and resources for the professional advisor space. And that's, professionals like the two of you in the insurance world and wealth planning world. It's also estate lawyers, it's accountants, family office, you name it. There's so many folks that kind of build that sort of circle around clients and are dealing with them and working with them when it comes to thinking about their financial planning and their estate planning. And for me, philanthropy has to be a part of that conversation. And I know you agree as well. And so I think the last thing I'd say sort of as my intro is just, I want folks to know that, resources are absolutely available to them through organizations like Toronto Foundation, through organizations like the Canadian Association of Gift Planners, the CAGP. There's, designations, the MFAP. There's all sorts of things out there. And I think advisors will be doing themselves a favor when they lean in and look for this intel, because it'll help them do their job better and ultimately help them serve their clients better.
Beautiful. So Aneil and Luke, look at we're really in the same space. They say as the tides rise, all the boats rise too. So there's no territorialness here. There's just providing wisdom and knowledge to people to help them be inspired and make decisions. Like we can be the catalyst for that. So if there are any advisors who would like to be involved, please reach out to Aneil, reach out to us, get in touch with the CAGP. We'll talk about that as we go along. But Luke, I want to get back to Graham.
Yeah.
Of blessed memory. My gosh. First of all, this whole thing about the memorial fund for him, this is part of the DNA of your family, right? Like I had Cindy Yell on my Philanthropy Friday a few weeks ago, and she was with sick kids, and she loved your dad, and she said your father was responsible for some of their largest gifts. But again, there are people who make lots of noise, like Mark Halpern. And then there are those people who do things very quietly behind the scenes, which is kind of unusual for your dad, but he was very quiet behind the scenes. Tell us a bit about his philanthropic, background and the type of guy he was, so that we can sort of talk about how this came a little bit more naturally than we think.
Yeah, he was always, passionate about giving back to the community, whether it was donating to various charities, hospitals, or even giving his time, teaching us hockey or sponsoring youth programs. Our family with some of our clients, are passionate about, giving back to the community that we've been so close to. And I think talking with Neil and you, setting up the Toronto Community Foundation was really the best way to not only continue our family's role in giving back to the community, but also honoring, his legacy. And so to have his name as the Graham Carter Foundation and to continue to grow the foundation with the help of both of you and a lot of community support, we're really excited, and to get input from clients and family members on where the money should go each year. I think are really passionate. We're passionate about, the cardiac arrhythmia, and there's so many different areas that we can really, have a meaningful impact in by giving back.
Fantastic. So you set up this donor advised fund at the Toronto Foundation, which we'll talk about.
Yep.
I know that you and I also shared sort of an article that I had written about, 10 steps to becoming a philanthropic entrepreneurial advisory, looking at, big picture, what does the family, the firm care about? What would be a dream about how much money you could accumulate or create? And then the question is, how do you do it? Getting the family involved, getting the staff involved, getting the clients involved, getting the suppliers involved. So where are you on that, Luke? And, again, the first thing was getting this foundation started.
Yeah. So to start off, just from getting it running, Neil really provided a lot of insight. This is obviously our first time starting a charity, and just the ease of setting it up, making that initial donation. And I think, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but starting off with a goal of 50,000 and then building it from there. And I think each year, as this foundation gains momentum, we're really trying to make an impact within our, within the charitable giving industry, especially cardiac, whether it's, certain hospital divisions. We're really close with St. Mike's. We've had some family history where, my mom about 15 years ago almost passed away from cardiac arrest, and St. Mike's was the hospital that saved her life. So we're really passionate about giving to there. But as you said, we're really close with sick kids, instruments, the medical technology, especially on the cardiac related industry, is becoming so advanced. And we just want to help not only create more awareness, but create, just less incidents from happening, because the chances of cardiac related, heart attacks or strokes have just been on the rise in the last couple of years. And we just want to create more awareness, but also invest in the technology to prevent as much of that happening.
To me, I always think about my father of blessed memory died at the age of 50 of a heart attack, Luke.
Yeah.
I was 11, as you know. So, you had your dad a while longer. It's still very hard. But I think about, technology today and things that are available.
Yeah.
We're living longer, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to be in good health. There's and I think the most to me, one of the best or most famous cardiac sort of fundraising was the Mike. Remember Mike? Was it called the Mikey?
Mikey.
Mikey,
The
right?
Mikey
You just
Network.
you
Yep.
just you just mentioned the word Mikey. Like, can you imagine somebody came up with the word Mikey because it was Mikey, right?
Yes.
Who had a heart attack playing hockey, I believe it was.
Yep.
And as a result, you can't go anywhere where you don't see a unit. What's it called?
The defibrillator.
The defibrillators. And just like, that's some guy who came up with that idea. Imagine all of the merits Mikey is getting on all on all the people's lives that he saved. So hopefully we're going to do the same thing for Graham.
Yeah.
That's the whole idea.
Yeah.
So what was it like, Luke? So you contacted Aneil. You sort of gave him an idea of what you wanted to do. Talk about how that whole process worked, and Aneil, what the process is on your end in terms of doing it. Maybe give some other ideas of other people who've done things, and how easy it is. Because ultimately, what I want to have come out of this Philanthropy Friday today is that everybody who's listening or anybody who's watching should be establishing a memorial fund for either a family member or setting it up for a client, setting it up for a teacher, setting it up. Like, there should be no reason, because people, there's only so many flowers you can get and cards. What you want to do is make impact, and that, I think, is what we want to talk about.
For sure. Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. So I've been in this role at this organization now for last week was my 13th anniversary, and
Wow.
so it's a long while. And what I would say is throughout that time, it's definitely picked up over the last number of years, but probably on average somewhere around 8 to 10 memorial funds being created a year. And it's probably a little higher now, and maybe a little less when I started. But the way that typically plays out is I'll get a call or an email from, in this case, someone like Luke, or sometimes from someone like Mark, who's saying, "Hey, I want you to meet my client Luke." And typically it's obviously not a good scenario, right? Because they've lost somebody, and sometimes it's very close to the passing, and so there's like real grieving happening. And in a scenario like that, I think ultimately the role that I play in that conversation is one of comfort and care. It's an ear to be listening, to understand what it is they want to do. And then I think it's about providing confidence to let folks know that we know what we're doing here. We've done this before. We have a very sort of simple process to get started, and there's like nuts and bolts that need to be sorted out pretty quickly. But beyond that, it can really, we don't need to rush a whole lot of else. And so I think for a lot of families, particularly when they're unfortunately encountering a scenario that's very sudden, a sudden passing, whether it's sickness, accident, what have you, I think sometimes they just want to know, like, holy cow, like, what do I do? Where do I go? How do I do this? And this is where someone like me, an organization like ours, and others out there can certainly be one of those first calls. And we will absolutely talk more about Mr. Carter and Luke's family and everything. But I think, just because it's fresh on my mind, I'll share, just 2 months ago, in Southwestern Ontario, there was a terrible car accident. A bunch of 5 young people passed, and a friend of that family, who actually resides in the UK, contacted us because they were referred to us by a family that already had a memorial fund with us and had one for a couple of years. And, I get this random phone call from someone in the UK, made a point to figure out how to connect with them, kind of off hours for me, on hours for them, and just kind of made it work. Then, subsequently was connected to the parents of one of the young people who passed. Very difficult conversation, but walk them through what it is we could do and how we could be of support in this scenario. We were able to sort of set something up pretty quickly. And then, the rest kind of just happened because they had a timeline, right? There was a memorial organized. They wanted to be established and set up for that. They wanted to be set up to accept donations coming in, whether they're checks, credit cards from people that want to give immediately. But then also longer term, they're set up for more complex gifts, like gifts of securities and other avenues too. And so kind of that framework is there now for them to do all these things. The other piece of this is about what is it that you want to do with the money once it's raised. And so, back to the conversation I had with Luke, what we really spent some time talking on in those first couple calls was, well, a donor advised fund is really, think of that like an account. There are a number of different types of accounts that you can consider. And so, most traditionally with donor advised funds, the endowment funds that really have that long-term legacy outlook. And those work really well for families that are looking well into the future, and the fund grows and it's like of a decent size where it's generating income and you're making real contributions year over year. In other scenarios, you may look at something more like a flow-through structure, which, kind of takes time to build up. You raise funds year over year for a number of years. You also give. There's no cap on how much you're giving away. And then over time, maybe you then build an endowment because you've built up enough of a nest egg. And so there's like different options to consider. So that's some of the conversation we had. Of course, we also talked about, well, like, what's your focus? Where does your family want to give? What are the things you care about? And the reason that's important on the front end, it's not always absolutely critical, but when a family like actually has something in mind and cares and wants to do a thing, it's important because donors to the fund, the more they can connect with the impact that you're looking to make, the more they'll probably want to give as well. And so the more clear you can be on the front end about, we're setting up this memorial fund, we have this interest in cardiac care, we want to support these kinds of things. That's kind of a direct line for a donor to say, okay, I care about that too. I've got a family member that's been affected by that. I want to support because I want my money going towards that kind of work. And that can really be a through line that can really help folks. And so I say that as a great thing to do. But there are also other scenarios, like what I referred to, where it's something sudden and maybe your head's just not all there. So then you can sort of create memorial funds that are a bit more, well, frankly, donor advised. And so then it's about us, the family, us, the donors. We're going to take this money and then we're going to make decisions to send money to areas of need and areas of that we care about. But you're giving less kind of specificity up front, and that can always change down the road. But like I think I just want folks to understand that there's kind of different pathways in, there's different avenues in. And then maybe just the last thing I'll say is when Luke and I were chatting, and Luke, you were very clear about, the focus on cardiac, and you mentioned St. Mike's, I recall, and there's kind of a real focus there. And you may recall one of the sort of lenses that I wanted to add to the conversation was, and this is particularly because I work at an organization that does a lot of research in our city and has a real knowledge of where needs are, et cetera. I'm always going to sort of lift up the little guy, and I'm always going to talk about kind of underserved grassroots organizations that, certainly just aren't going to have the same eyeballs that, big hospitals in Toronto are going to have.
Yeah.
So why that's important is, cardiac care in, corners of Scarborough or corners of Rexdale or in other parts of this country where they're not, fully accessible to, a large teaching hospital, et cetera. Like, I think it's important to think about what that whole ecosystem of care looks like. And so I think, that's probably one of the differentiators ultimately that a donor advised fund at a community foundation is really going to kind of bring you, because we're going to have our eyes open to all the different assets and sort of opportunities out there to really drive impact. So hopefully, Mark, that gives you a sense of some of the things that we think about when we're having these initial conversations.
No, it's very good. As a matter of fact, I want people to be clear that community foundations are not just for setting up memorial funds. This is just a unique niche that we're talking about. Most of the time, they're being set up for enduring family legacies, as we said, endowments. using the opportunity to donate appreciated securities, life insurance, flow through shares, private share donation strategies. There's a lot that's out there. And there are, as Aneil said, there's 200 community foundations across country. So speak to your local community foundation. And if you need some tutoring, Aneil can give you some ideas
Absolutely.
from the Toronto Foundation, how that works. One thing you did bring up, though, Aneil, which is a little surprising, like you mentioned about 8 foundations, memorial foundations being set up a year. We're sitting here in a city, of millions of people, like with an M, millions of people.
Yeah.
Like there, believe it or not, there are more than 8 people who die in Canada every year. And people of significance and people who are very popular, like Graham, and very connected. Why is it like, I know that as part of the Jewish community, when somebody dies and you're at a funeral home, they say make a donation and they give you their little donor advised fund or their little nonprofit to get started. I know that the money, even at the Toronto Foundation, can be moved, if you'd like, to your own private foundation, to another donor advised fund. It's not like it's landlocked, but why?
Yeah. So this is more anecdotal than specific stats, but if I just think about all the obituaries that I come across, the large majority of them, 80-90% of them, say things like donate to hospital X or donate to the
right, 100%. Always, they always say something. Yeah,
and so philanthropy is happening. But I guess the smaller number of foundations is just because, frankly, and you're doing a great service here, but like a lot of people don't know, right? And so I think this idea of setting up a foundation, ultimately, it feels a bit daunting. You're like, a foundation, that feels like a really big thing. I'm not sure that that's really, at this stage, is that really what we're thinking about? Like there's a small percentage of the Canadian population that actually like think and breathe in those circles and like think of themselves as somebody that can have a private foundation. But I think what's really critical is that donor advised funds are way more accessible by way more Canadians. And I think that's something that, if you leave this conversation without knowing anything else, I think I want you to know that donor advised funds are absolutely an option. They exist and are offered at community foundations. They started at community foundations back in the 1960s. At the Vancouver Foundation was the first in Canada. They are now offered by, easily close to 50 to 100 other types of organizations too, financial institutions, other third parties, etc. So like you can pretty much walk anywhere, especially with an advisor like Mark, and find the right place for you. The entry point, the minimum to set up a foundation at Toronto Foundation is $10,000, and then it sort of goes from there. And so we've really tried to make them way more accessible. And as I was saying earlier, there's kind of various options available too from a flexibility standpoint. But I think ultimately, Mark, it comes down to awareness. And my number of 8 to 10 memorial funds is one thing. Kind of overall, there's kind of 50 to 60, maybe upwards of 70 new funds being set up at Toronto Foundation a year. The slice of memorial is, a tenth of something. But I think it's important, and you've hit the nail on the head. There's unfortunately a lot more people passing year over year. And so, I think of this all the time because I'm in the business, but like when people pass, I'm absolutely mindful of, could there be an option here where, that family could set up a memorial and actually use that as a lever to really drive attention. And then also it brings a family together. I've got so many examples of families that have set up memorial funds with us. And now I'm thinking 10 years ago, 8 years ago, and I think about the family and how they've shifted over the years. I think of one family who unfortunately lost a son and a sibling, at university. And, that family now, their siblings are probably in their late 20s. There's a grandkid now in the family, but I've seen that family grow over the last decade. And the care that they've put into memorializing their brother, memorializing their son, and the things they've done since, and the closeness it's brought, you can't put a price on that stuff. And it's so important to see how families can really work through their grief and get to a point where they're doing something that is meaningful and special and connected, and it's at the heart. And that's ultimately what matters here.
Amazing. Luke, do you have anything to add to that at all?
Yeah, I think he was right. Setting up an endowment fund, it was a little daunting at first because, there's so many unknowns, but working with you and the Toronto Community Foundation, it was really easy. Just, what we wanted to do, spoke a lot of time talking with my family, what was our goal, and then working with the foundation to set it up. But even the landing page that we made where people can go and make a donation is very easy, and the page where I can see all the donations, it's been great. And I know we got a lot. I made a LinkedIn post about a month ago, and the amount of support from the community, from family, friends was astounding. And the best thing that I've seen or felt so far about setting this up is going on to my donor page and seeing family and friends make donations. It was really,
Money from heaven,
yeah, it
and you're
was
doing
great
great.
to see.
Yeah,
And
and just imagine, Aneil was mentioning about $10,000 is the minimum, but there were others. There were also online donor advised funds, GiveWise.ca, MyCharityFund.ca, got Canada Gives, you got Benefaction, Abundance. There's so many different. There's no limitation in terms of what they are. But for that $10,000, Aneil, if you give it with a credit card, you get a charitable receipt for $10,000, which saves you $5,000 approximately of tax, next April. So imagine if you gave that $10,000, though, instead of with a credit card, with some appreciated securities. Let's say you have some stock that cost you $2,000 and now it's worth 10. If you sold that, you'd have on the $8,000. You give 27% of that to the government as capital gains taxes. But by donating in kind to the Toronto Foundation, no capital gains taxes, full receipt. It's magic. And I think people just have to get started by opening up an account and using that, because they can give that money to one of 87,000 nonprofits in Canada.
Yeah, Mark, I'll just add a couple things. It's your securities comment there is hitting the nail on the head, because I can't tell you how many times, even just in the last couple of months, where I've been in a conversation with a prospective family, a prospective individual that's looking to set up a fund, and I'll say, hey, so I'm not giving tax advice, but I want to make sure you're aware of this scenario and blah blah blah, and more often than not, they're like, no, what are you talking about? And I think, holy cow, the Canadian government has put these laws in place. They're very generous. We incentivize charitable giving in this country, probably some of the most in all of the Western society. And the amount of Canadians that are not taking advantage of this, it really is astounding.
Yeah.
And then the one other thing I want to say, I meant to say it earlier, and it's little touches. So let me give you one example. So when setting up a memorial fund, one of the things I'll often say to a family is I want them thinking about obviously what the fund name is and how they want to memorialize their loved one. But one of the pieces is I'm very intentional about suggesting, think about what you want to make as the establishing gift. Is there a number? Is there an amount? Is there something that's of significance to your lost family member, your lost loved one, or maybe to your whole family? And that's kind of no one ever sees that. That's on the agreement. That's really just on the legal documentation between you and us. But it's all the things we can do to try to make this more familiar and more comfortable. I think it just adds to that care that helps people see the path forward. When they're in the grieving, it's hard. I get that. But I think as you move through it, year 2, year 3, year 5, year 10, you start seeing how this can really be something that galvanizes a family and really brings people together in memory of a very dear loved one. And you can do so much great things and so much great impact in their name. And that's the gift that keeps on giving.
Amazing. No, it's fantastic. I just want to tell you about a recent gift. Again, there are a lot of people on this call on Philanthropy Friday who are from the charitable space. And unfortunately, most charities today are still focused on current gifts to keep the lights on, and maybe, capital campaigns every few years. But the whole area of planned legacy gifts it's not getting it's certainly it's picking up, but it's not anywhere where it could be. So somebody I know who passed away in February, 15 years ago, he had created a $1 million life insurance policy. He had a charity that he was very close to, very, very close to. So he bought a 15-pay life insurance policy. And when he died in February, this $1 million got paid to his donor advised fund that he'd already set up. So that $1 million is a charitable donation. So that saves his estate $500,000 of tax. But here's the better part. The charity, of course, was just lost a huge donor. What are we going to do? He'd made arrangements in his will that 5%, even though the money would be professionally managed, 5% every single year forever was going to go to that charity. And when the charity found out, the fundraiser, this woman, she cried. She could not believe that they were going to be getting $50,000 a year every year perpetually, you know? And all charities have major donors. Let's talk to them. You know, if they're giving $50,000, let's say, hey, why not add another 10? You'll get a charitable receipt. Let's get an insurance gift in place to maintain that 50,000 forever, or use 10%, use 10,000 of the 50 to create something like that. It's not the only game in town, but we have to be thinking more strategically. Luke, wouldn't you agree? Like, I mean, that's what your father talked about.
Yeah, especially, you know, what's the most efficient way to do it? You know, structure around taxes, everything's so complicated now. And in that scenario, that was the best way to do it.
Yeah. Amazing.
Hey, Mark, on that example, I think something I'd love to just add, particularly because you said some of this audience is folks from the charitable sector as well. You know, folks that work at large institutions, hospitals, universities, et cetera, you know, they're set up. They're doing these things. Many of them might even offer donor advised funds. They've got planned giving departments. They're sorted. But there's a whole other slice of the sector that is not as organized. And I think it's important to say out loud that donor advised funds can actually be a real asset to many of those organizations. And the example you shared is a perfect exemplifying that, right? Because in that scenario, that gentleman was able to get organized, had a DAF, put the money there, and then set up that charity he loved as a beneficiary from his DAF in perpetuity. And so that's then that fundraiser is on the receiving end of that gift that's going to just keep on coming in. And I think sometimes smaller organizations start sort of fearing a little bit and thinking, oh, wow, donor advised funds are going to take money away from me. But I think it's really important to think about how a donor advised fund can be complementary to the work that you're doing. And the way I like to describe it sometimes is for organizations to think of a community foundation or a donor advised fund almost like their outsourced plan giving. So they're not set up to do, you know, set up legacy funds and endowments in people's names and stuff, but that's what we can do. They send their donor here. We set up an endowment, a memorial fund, and then who's the beneficiary? It's designated back to that organization.
Right. It's such an important point. You know, people might think that you're a charity and that you're spending the money, but no, you're the custodian. You're just the trustee for that charity. So as you're saying, it's very important. You know, the big legacy charities, the hospitals, the universities, then you've got the ones in between, and then you've got the ones that are starting off in their basement or their garage. But those ones in the middle can have a very buoyant, very effective plan giving program just by working with the Toronto Foundation or another community foundation to now have an endowment program and have a URL that they could direct people to. And they don't have to worry about every year coming up with their donation receipts and all the rest of it. So we will definitely have in this post, you know, the URL, certainly Aneil to contact you, and also Luke to be able to drive people to the Graham Carter Memorial Foundation, so people who knew Graham can make a donation, or they can reach out to you, Luke, certainly if they're clients or friends, to figure out if there's a more efficient way of giving. So I think that'll be outstanding. So any last, you know, today's story to me was very personal. You know, it really, you know, I love what I do. I love what we do. You know, it's a great thing to help people go from success to significance, you know, and I think it's a beautiful feeling. You know, whether you're honoring a parent or continuing a tradition or just starting to explore giving in a more intentional way, people, I think, just have to know that there are tools and partners like the Toronto Foundation that are ready and willing to help along the way. So please reach out to Aneil. Please reach out to Luke, see how he did it, right? And please reach out to me if there's something that, you know, we can help you with. Any last words, guys? Luke?
Well, I just want to thank you both for, your help and support along this whole journey. Obviously, this was our first time setting it up. You guys made it really easy, and my, family and I really appreciate it. And now we've created, a living legacy for my dad, who, we can continue to honor his memory by continuing to, give back to the community about something that we're passionate about. And it means a lot to my family, and, we're really excited to grow.
I think your dad, he'd say something very sarcastic at this point, right? But I think even he would like what you're doing. Even
Yeah,
he would like it, I'm sure.
thank you. It means a lot. It means a lot,
Yeah.
guys.
And Aneil, any last thoughts?
Listen, I think it comes across pretty clearly. Like I care about this work, and I want to be having as many of these conversations as possible. And as I said off the top, if they come here and work with us, amazing. But I know a lot about this charitable sector, and I know lots of folks, and I know I can connect folks where they need to be connected to do good work. And ultimately, as Canadians, right? Like I think we want to be, we live in a country and in a community that is one that celebrates each other, looks after each other, and I want more of that. And so through memorial giving, if that's one way to do it, then I'm all for it. And through partnerships with folks like you, Mark, and folks like you, Luke, I think it's entirely possible. And so I'm super optimistic and excited about what's possible. And I just want to be here to kind of be helpful and be that sort of resource that folks can count on. So thank you, Mark, for the opportunity. And Luke, it's been an absolute pleasure working with your family, and I look forward to the more that we'll do together.
So do we. Thank you. Appreciate
Good.
it.
And Luke, when we got together just several months after your father passed away, which is it's a year this past April, right?
Yeah.
I remember I said, when you finally set up that foundation, I'm making $1,000 donation to the Graham Carter Memorial Fund in memory of your father, who was a mentor to me and a dear friend and a community builder. So you send me the URL today. I've got the credit card ready. Sorry, Aneil, it's not going to be Appreciated Securities, but I might just send it over from my DAF, whatever. We'll arrange it today, and hopefully it'll just be the start of more that we can do together with KLU and Advocates and Manulife and Sun Life and Canada Life and your clients, and doing some more great stuff together. So I really
Thank you, Mark. That means a lot, to my family and I, and we really appreciate not only the donation, but your support along the whole way. It's really important to us.
I feel grateful that I'm in this space and could offer this, this information. So thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much for joining us today. Okay. And really, it was a great conversation. I have a little bit of goosebumps from really just, it's real stuff. It's like MRI for the soul,
Yeah.
and I feel grateful to be able to do that. Luke, thank you for joining me. And Aneil, thank you for coming as well.
Thanks for having us.
I'm just going to wrap up now. Okay, guys. Wow. Thank you, everybody. That was outstanding. I'm just so grateful that we could have this conversation today. I feel very blessed to be in this amazing business for almost 35 years, helping people and families. So what's your next steps? Well, one is the 48-hour rule. If something resonated with you today that you heard, make sure you do something about it right away. Make a donation to Graham's Memorial Fund. Contact Aneil, contact Luke, reach out to us. Let's start incorporating strategic philanthropy into your planning. And if you're a charity, let's talk to you about how you can go out to your major donors and create millions and millions of dollars of future gifts with a short runway over the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, so that in the future, that fundraiser doesn't have to wake up in January and say, oh my gosh, we need a lot of money. Next thing is, please reach out to Aneil and Luke on LinkedIn. They're posting on lots of great information. Reach out to us if you'd like a copy of our tax letter digest or one-pagers, 160 articles on all great ways to give. And if you haven't watched my TED Talk called The New Philanthropy, which will really help frame what we talk about, Aneil mentioned, invest, get the MFAP, the Master Financial Advisor Philanthropy. I'm on the faculty of that, and it's a great designation that's offered through the CAGP, Spire Philanthropy, and Knowledge Bureau. So, and if you want, I can get you a 15% discount too. So just private message me. And for those advisors who really want to step it up, our Power of Platinum mentoring and coaching program with me and Jim Rudo, we started over 5 years ago. We've had over 200 advisors become experts in strategic philanthropy, high net worth insurance, corporate insurance, practice management, and collaboration. So our next group is starting in October. Reach out if you'd like information or to get the curriculum. We'd love you to join us. The main goal there is that everybody should be at a top of the table production or above, which we've seen people 2 to 5 times their business, but really to build their business in a way that's meaningful and learn about what we've talked about, and put it into your own practice. Just don't ignore it. And we collaborate with advisors, professional advisors from across the country, accountants, lawyers, investments, family offices, and lots of life insurance advisors who use us as part of their bench to meet their clients and the people that they're dealing with in the nonprofit space. So please reach out to us. I want to wish everybody a glorious, wonderful day. Have a beautiful weekend. And for those who are celebrating, Shabbat Shalom. All the best. We'll see you next time.